since I'll share my screen, Sharmishta, and I think you made me the co-host, so maybe I can, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's visible, sir.
Visible. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you so much once again, and welcome you all in this lecture series, 2 days, basically. So Kuzung Zangpo La, once again to you. I'm trying to just learn this word. I like this word very much, Kuzung Zangpo La. So welcome you. And in the last class, as you remember, that we talked about pragmatics, the role of context in interpretation, how we decimate meaning. And today, I'll be talking about something else, moving on to another field where earlier we were in pragmatics, and today I am in social linguistics. So the beginners, especially not knowing about linguistics, I think I was telling you yesterday that, yeah, I'll be talking about something related to social linguistics, regional and social varieties of language. See, and so the regional and social varieties of language. So what is this variety? You know, and this is a very neutral term as a linguist we use mainly. The layman's understanding is something like they use the term dialect. You know, they don't use variety. But as a linguist, we try to avoid those kind of terms. You see, and dialect, because in dialect, what is happening there? There are different kind of interpretation is associated with dialect, as if like dialect is a degraded version of a language. You see, and always inferior to the standard language. You know, so and in our understanding that nothing is degraded, nothing is inferior. Talking about the linguistic structure, it is all in the perception level. Okay, so we try to use this term variety instead of dialect. So that's what carefully I have chosen the term. We as a linguist choose the term variety. So if you look at the simple title, regional and social varieties of language. So why regional? As you can understand, the region, based on region, definitely language changes. There are different kind of variety we do notice, and social based on social class, we have a different variety. Social class, let's say different social class, whether you are a working class, upper middle class, or upper class, a lower middle class. It depends on that also, and what kind of educational background you do have. Depending on that as well, you may have a different kind of variety. Try to understand that, and we all know. Let's say in your household, someone's mother-in-law, or father-in-law, or grandfather is less educated or illiterate for that matter. So he or she may speak in a different manner. Okay, and maybe your maid servant, even they speak in a different manner. Educated people, let's say educated in the sense, especially there are many people who stays in the rural places. They are more educated than us, at least. But somehow we know how to read and write, right? That's what we say, we are educated. But many people, they know how to read and write. Actually, they are not educated, in my understanding. They do not have any value education. Anyway, so we do speak different kind of variety depending on the social class. So my lecture will be today, and based on this regional and social varieties of language, and it could be any language. Let's say any language for that matter, whether it is English, it is Hindi, it is Bangla, or it's your language Zonka, whichever the language we're talking about. Just try to understand that you speak Zonka. Zonka is your national language, and most of the places, especially western parts of Bhutan, it is spoken. Most of the, especially western district, western districts, and you all know that Thimphu, Basa, Paro, Ha, I think Dagana, Punakha, Chukha, mainly in the western districts of Bhutan. Dzongkha is spoken, but somewhere in the north and the southern districts, Dzongkha is not the mother tongue of many Bhutanese for that matter. So we all know, but it's a national language. You have to learn that. You have to speak that because it's introduced in your school curriculum. You all know. So what I am saying, depending on the regional variation, whether it is spoken in Thimphu, Gaza, Paro, Ha, Punakha, Dagana, Chukha, definitely you will see that there are certain kind of variation, regional variation. What I say, regional variation, depending on the geographical region. Okay, so we linguists work on this both regional side as well as the social sides. Okay, so today's class I'll try to show you how we carry out research on this both aspect, regional aspect and the social aspects of the language. Okay, so this is briefly the overview of my lecture will be, and then I'll slowly and gradually go into the detail of my lecture. And as you can understand that my understanding is something like I start from the very basic level and then slowly and gradually try to introduce you the theory. And today's class also I'll try to do the same. Since you are all mainly, I presume that you do not know enough about linguistics. So briefly, I'll just introduce you some of the basic understanding in the introduction part, and then I'll move on to a little bit of theoretical part as well as kind of let's say some kind of findings and the results, and also some kind of research which I have conducted personally in India and especially in North Bengal. So I'll try to talk about that part as well if time permits. Okay, so this is that briefly. So you know me, it's already been introduced, and still if you have any doubt, questions and clarifications even after the lecture, you can simply email it to me. My email ID is harimadhabray@gmail.com. Uh, now, uh, now look at the background of the lecture. As I told you, that language changes depending on the geographical region, and try to see that I'm not telling you that, but this is the famous North Indian proverb in Hindi, and that's the literal translation that "Do kosh mein badalta hai pani, teen kosh mein badalta hai bani." That means every 2 miles water changes, every 3 miles language changes. So it's not only 3 miles; it could be less than that as well. 1 kilometer, 2 kilometer, or maybe less than that. Maybe just if you cross one street from another, from one place to another place, only hardly a kilometer, even you may see the changes. Okay, so that's what I was talking about, the regional variation. And so language changes. Every 2 miles water changes, every 3 miles language changes. And not only every 2 miles water changes, I had seen that especially if there is a tube well, you try to dig it up, maybe within 5 or 6 meters or 7 meters, you may find different kind of water layer. So it's not necessarily 2 miles or 3 miles. The same thing is applicable that when you are talking about language, language also changes depending on the geographical region. Now, and it's really interesting. You must have read this George Bernard Shaw, and famous Pygmalion. And based on this George Bernard Shaw's Pygmalion, there is a movie, My Fair Lady, and most of the students of linguistics, especially in phonetics course, we show that movie, My Fair Lady, and you will see that in my Pygmalion there is a character. Professor, especially here, Professor Henry Higgins. Professor Henry Higgins. So Henry Higgins, what he used to do, let's say, he can, looking at the way people speak, he can exactly tell you which part of the world you come from and where is your house. So he's very famous professor, especially professor of phonetics, and this actually George Bernard Shaw was really influenced by a phonetician, and it's a real phonetician. His name is Henry Sweet, Professor Henry Sweet. So in the movie, it's Henry Higgins, but the real phonetician, real linguist was Professor Henry Sweet. So it's really interesting. So he could tell you, looking at how a person speaks, he can tell you exactly where he comes from, and maybe the location of the place. It's really interesting. And I was doing this forensic linguistics and forensic, workshop last time, and that's what it is really interesting that mainly depending on the person, the way he speaks, depending on his pronunciation also, and whichever the language we speak, you can exactly trace the person. if you know phonetics very well. Let's say the way I speak, you must have understood that. Yes, I'm from India. Definitely, I'm not from America or or Britain or some other places. Definitely, I'm from India. And let's say if you are little careful, also you can definitely say that yes, this person speaks this kind of English or that kind of English, but not especially talking about Indian English. I do not speak South Indian English. I speak North Indian English and even North Indian English, whichever the neutralized English I am trying to speak, But I speak English, okay? So you understand that, So try to guess that kind of trace where I come from also, if you are very, very minute in details, okay? So really interesting, like geographical variation, as I was telling you. So every language has a lot of variation, the way it is spoken. So talk about English. English is spoken in India, and in India, as I was, the Indian variety of English is also differs based on region. So India, if you talk about Bengali, the ways Bengali people they speak English. People from Punjab, people from Delhi, people from again from Mumbai, as well as from Tamil Nadu or maybe from Kerala. They have a different kind of accent. So so Indian English also, there is a different kind of Indian English we see. You talk about USA, and again the USA variety is different, UK variety is different, the variety which is spoken in Australia, it is also different. New Zealand variety is different. If you talk about even the South African variety, is different. So it's not necessarily that English is this English or that English. The English is spoken in Philippines or especially let's say Mongolia and other places. They have a different kind of structure for that matter. So I can talk about that. And famous person Raj Kachru, Yamuna Kachru, and there are many people who have worked on this world Englishes. David Leitner, and many other people from India also. So we know that the kind of varieties of English, and for that matter, the variation, whichever the language we are talking about, whether it is English, whether it is Hindi, even if we talk about Hindi is not the national language. The way we say that Zunka is a national language of Bhutan, but Hindi is not the national language of India. This is a misconception if some people have that kind of understanding that Hindi is the national language. No, it's not the national language. It's the official language along with English. Along with English, but we have 8 schedule. There are 22 languages at the same time. So what I'm saying is that when you talk about Hindi in general, Hindi, if you look at Hindi, Hindi has for that matter. If you're talking about Hindi, it's also the lingua franca, as I was telling you, lingua franca of different places. Even if you go to Arunachal Pradesh, even if you go to Siliguri for that matter, many people Siliguri, many people they speak Hindi, and even south, many people they speak Hindi. It's a lingua franca. Even not only even in North India, if you're talking about Hindi spoken in Rajasthan, which is different, Hindi spoken in Bihar, which is also different. But we understand some of the things. And Bangla for that matter. Bangla has also lots of variety. At least 4 varieties of Bangla, what Suniti Kumar Chatterjee and Sukumar Sen had already talked about. The 4 varieties of Bangla. So the 4 varieties, I will not tell you the details of the 4 varieties, but Rari, Bango, and then Kamrupi, and there is one more, especially in the Bihar, Jharkhand area. Okay, so there are 4 varieties Suniti Kumar Chatterjee also talked about. So every language has variation. What I am saying is that depending on the geographical region, language will have variation. Okay, so whether it is Zonka or Bangla, Hindi or English, that's what the regional variation I am talking about. And the social variation, as I told you, the social variation based on the social class. Based on the social class means that whether you are a teacher, whether you are educated, illiterate, what kind of working class you are, depending on that also you will speak in a different manner. Okay, so based on that, so it's mainly part in the area of sociolinguistics. So mainly briefly today I'll introduce you these 2 things. this regional varieties as well as the social varieties of language. So that is the brief background of my lecture. Now, as you can see the overview of the lecture, I think it is clear what is the overview. So mainly introduction. In the introduction part, what I'm going to talk about in the introduction part, some of the basic concepts, mainly what is language and what is dialect. Let's some of the basic concepts and some of the misconceptions what we have, and then try to introduce you the regional varieties. So how to conduct research on regional varieties if you're really interested. And then social varieties of language, how to also look at social varieties of language. So based on, so try to introduce you theoretical, some of the theoretical understanding, Julia Blaber, Peter Turgill study, and then a little bit of discussion and then conclusions. And I'll take some questions as well if time permits. Okay. So now, so introduction part, let's say language, and this is where the whole thing, the basic understanding that when you talk about language, mainly we talk about the standard language, and dialect is, as I told you, that it's a kind of a, this is the understanding is that it's a degraded version of the language. It is kind of considered to be the language, it's the inferior one. That dialect, even if you talk about the word bhasha in Hindi, bhasha and even Bangla also bhasha and upabhasha. Upabhasha is something like dialect which is derived from language. And related to the language and dialect thing, famous sociolinguist Weinreich says that language has an army with it, and but dialect doesn't have. Language has an army with it. Army is like the power, state support, government support, the media support. Everybody is supporting. It is introduced in the school. So as a result, there is an army, there is a force behind the language. But if you talk about the dialect, for dialect there is even talking about the situation in Bhutan. If you try to understand Zonkha, Zonkha is definitely one of the major language in Bhutan, and the national language. But alongside Zonkha, there are many other languages that are also spoken in Bhutan. There are many minority languages that are also spoken. But Zonkha has, let's say, because it has got the national status, especially national language status, and as a result, it is introduced in the school curriculum and different places. So as a result, the minority languages, the same thing. If you talk about the cases of India, in India, you'll see that there are many languages, more than 200 languages, or at least if you look at the raw data. I was conducting a research. And we found that the raw data says that there are more than 6,600 languages. I'm talking about the raw data. Mother tongue survey of India. We're trying to do a mother tongue survey of India. Then we try to look at that. Actually, it's not 6,600, but talking about the name, then we came up with some kind of strategy that yes. So there has to be kind of distinction. How we distinguish between language and dialect. Okay. So anyway, so these are some of the things. Let's say what is language, what is dialect, and what are the things. So briefly, I'll just tell you what is language and what is dialect. Now, if you talk about standard language and versus dialect, that kind of distinction, standard language is mainly kind of idealized variety. So whether it's the Zonkha variety or the Hindi variety or the Bangla variety, it's an idealized variety. Okay. So, and it's mostly accepted as official language of the community or country. Whichever the community or the country we are talking about is the Bengali community, the Hindi community, or the Zonkha community. So it's accepted as official language of the community or country for that matter. And is also taught in schools, if you're talking about standard language, and printed in newspaper, books and magazines, education, broadcasting in public context, and many other things, and that's what the main, if you look at the argument, that the statement by Weinreich, language can argue with it, and definitely the state support. State support is that the support from your state. State means their nation, let's for that matter. So you have national support for the language, standard language. But the dialect, on the other, you do not have all this kind of supports. The kind of points as I mentioned about. Yeah. So mainly, maybe some new dialects because of their prestige and the kind of power the people they feel about their language. Maybe some people they have started coming up with some newspaper or maybe started writing books in their dialect also. In many cases, it's happening. And in India also, you will see that though there are 22 scheduled languages, those 22 scheduled languages are introduced in schools, colleges, but there are many minority languages, or people say that it's dialect, but people they write it in their language also. So Avadi is one of the cases. Avadi. If you see, talk about Avadi, you have lots of literature for that matter. Many people they write. Rajasthani, for that matter, Rajasthani have lots of literature as well. So it's not necessarily that dialect may not have newspaper or books, but mostly many dialects do not have some books and uh, uh, education and broadcasting in public context. Let's say if you talk about Bhojpuri in Indian context, Bhojpuri is not a national language, especially official language in India. But Bhojpuri nowadays, people started. There are many broadcasting TV channels. You will see that. So maybe there are kind of differences, but mostly these are the points. All of the points you will find with standard language, but not necessarily in dialect. So how do we distinguish between language and dialect? How, as a linguist, so these are some of the criteria we talk about. One of the criteria is mutual intelligibility. So what is this mutual intelligibility? Mutual intelligibility says that dialect, let's say language and dialect, so they can mutually understand one another. Mutually understand one another. So let's say a dialect of Thimpu, let's say Zonka variety, which is spoken in Thimpu, based on the regional, or maybe Gasa and Paro. So people of Garo, they definitely can understand the Gasa variety, or the Thimpu variety, or the Ha variety, or the Dagana variety. Okay, because it's basically the dialect depending on the region. So the same thing. So that there is a criteria we talk about mutual intelligibility. And one more thing they talk about lexical or vocabulary comparability. So they compare the words of the languages. So let's say there are at least, let's say, some words. They take the basic words and try to compare that. How many how many percentage, whether it's 70%, 80%, or 90% similarity in the lexicon, in the word level. And so these are one of the criteria to distinguish language and dialect. So whether they are in the same language, the same dialect. And another thing people always talk about: history, culture, written language, written script, literature. There are things they also talk about. Okay, so these are some of the criteria they talk about. And but as I told you that these are not merely the linguistic criteria which decides which is language or which is not a language. So there are criteria beyond it when we talk about politics and polity. So politics and polity decides which is a language and which is a dialect. I'm telling you, and especially in India's case, it is the same thing. Polity and politics. What I'm saying is that, let's see, if we talk about Indian Constitution and the 8 scheduled languages. Earlier in India, it was the 8 scheduled languages. We had only 15 scheduled languages. Then 3 languages were introduced. It became 18, and then there is a pressure from 4 language community: Maithili, Bodo, Santali, and Dogri. 4 language community. There is a pressure. So Indian government they had to again include those 4 languages. So now in Indian Constitution, 8 scheduled, we have 22 scheduled languages, 8 scheduled languages. So as I was telling you, so earlier these languages were considered to be the dialect of X and Y. So for that matter, I can talk about this. Let's say Maithili. Maithili was considered to be the dialect of Hindi, but now it is, since it is the 8 scheduled languages, no, it's a language now. Okay, so the important criteria is not about the linguistic criteria. Some of the politics decide this criteria, and and this is where our understanding, and there are many cases, as I was telling, the mutual intelligibility criteria. Again, it can fall flat. If you talk about China, even China, there are different varieties of Chinese: Mandarin, Sentinelese, even Hakka. There are different varieties. So this Hakka variety or Sentinelese variety or the Mandarin variety, which is spoken there, people may not understand each other. But China, so because of the same national policy, so they have, they want to say that, yeah, this is our Mandarin is our national language, or and they also follow the same script also. There is another criteria. They try to kind of assimilate the whole nation, one language, one kind of nation kind of formula. So, but in India and many places, the one language, one nation formula cannot be kind of argued for, because look at the diversity of Indian scenario. So we have four language families: Indo-Aryan, Dravidian, Austroasiatic, Tibeto-Burman. So, and mainly the language what you speak, Dzongkha and other varieties, the Tibeto-Burman varieties. The Sino-Tibetan Dzongkha itself, Sino-Tibetan Central Buddhist language. So we all understand that. So India has also lots of Tibeto-Burman languages. It's not only in Bhutan, the whole Himalayan range, in the Nepal as well as in our mainly the northeastern states in India, Arunachal Pradesh, even Sikkim. Your teacher, she comes from, I think, Tripura. Even in Tripura also you'll find lots of Tibeto-Burman language. I'm talking about Sharmishta. She's a speaker of Indo-Aryan language, but at the same time, so what I'm saying is that so we have lots of diversity in the Indian setting. So so there are different criteria. So this criteria, that criteria, but it is more or less it's the politics and polity at times to decide which is language and which is not a language. Okay. So but our understanding, what is the linguistic understanding? Linguistically speaking, even standard language is the dialect, because it's also variety. Try to understand that. Let's say for a time being, if you are talking about Dzongkha, and Dzongkha is spoken in the western part, and mainly the Thimphu variety, which is chosen as the standard one. Talk about Bangla, Bengali for that matter. Bengali, which variety of Bangla is the standard one? The Bangla variety, which is spoken near Kolkata, is basically the Radi variety. Radi is basically the Nadia, the river. So Radi variety. So somewhere, and that variety is also it's a kind of dialect. It's a different kind of variety. So in our understanding, linguistic understanding, standard language is a dialect. Try to see that, that point. And no one dialect or language is better, more correct, or more logical than any other. So every language. So talking about Einstein, I do not know. Einstein say that it's any scientific idea, anything, invention can be explained in any language of the world, whichever the whatever the big ideas you come up with. Every language has the capacity, and that's what we talk about creativity. And every language has the creativity. So every language, for that matter, dialect, whatever you're talking about. You see, so in our understanding, is that this is better, this is bad, this is it is basically it's somewhere in the perception level, and because of the reasons, as I mentioned, some of the reasons, standard language, the kind of perception or misconception we do have in the society, because of that we have that kind of opinion. Okay, so so this is where, in brief, and there is one more understanding about accent and dialect. I'll just briefly introduce you that, and then move on to. So we all speak with an accent, whichever the accent we are talking about. So I have a different accent, you have a different accent. So, and this is the myth or the misconception that some speakers have accent while others do not. We all have accent. Okay? It's not that. So this is the myth. If somebody says that, so what is this accent and myth? So accent, when you talk about accent, restricted to the description of aspects of pronunciation. Some aspects of pronunciation. So identify where an individual speaker is from regionally and socially. It can identify you depending on the accent. And that's what I was talking about Professor Henry Sweet or Henry Higgins, in My Fair Lady. So depending on the accent, you can just simply identify the person. And on the other hand, if you're talking about dialect, it's dialect in the more broader term, the features of grammar and vocabulary, it is a more level. And also definitely in the aspects of pronunciation. Okay? So accent is mainly covering this aspects of pronunciation, and on the basis of that, you can identify a person or individual regionally or socially. But dialect, if you're talking about the dialect, is a more broader term, and which is operating in different levels of the grammar. Okay, And so this is another. Now coming back to the next topic. So I'm done with the introduction part. Not spend too much time in the introduction. Now let's come back to regional varieties of language, and then I'll move on to the social variety of language. So if you talk about the regional varieties of language now try to understand the regional varieties. As I already told you that depending on the region, so there can be variation in language, and regional varieties of language is often source of humor and also joke at times. So the kind of variety you speak, depending on that the standard variety, people may make fun of you, and yeah, he speaks this way, he speaks that way, that kind of. So Hindi also, let's say Hindi, yes, spoken by Bihari, especially the people who come from here mainly. So there is a distinction between sa and sha. So especially dental and palatal sa and sha. So and mainly the Bihari they speak the dental one, and Bengali on the other hand the Bengali speakers they use the palatal sha. So fish, the word let's say fish. Bengali will have, or definitely it's a fish, but Bihari speaker will say fish, not sha. So so you have that kind of depending on the region also different kind of pronunciation. So Sharmishta. So Bengali will definitely say Sharmishta, but maybe Bihari speakers will say Sarmista, Sarmista, Sarmista.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Am I right, Sharmista?
Yes, sir. Yes, you're right, sir.
So that's what the kind of Sarmista. So it's not Sharmista. Okay. So really, so that kind of regional variety, we see that. So now talking about the dialectology, the kind of study of dialects, and as I told you, one of the criteria I already introduced, the mutual intelligibility criteria, the people who study dialects, and this is the field we call it dialectology. Like sociolinguistics, within the sociolinguistics there is a specially sub-branch here, dialectology, we study the dialects, and these are the side criteria: mutual intelligibility, they look at it, identification of consistent features on different levels of grammar, in the different levels of the grammar, in phonological level, morphological level, syntactic level, semantics level. They'll try to identify different features, whether consistent or not consistent. On the basis of that, they will try to draw a line, isoglosses, dialect boundaries. I'll talk about isogloss and dialect boundary, and then they come up with kind of linguistic atlases. Atlases is basically map. They come up with linguistic map. Okay, so that's what dialectologists, the people do. So that's what again our understanding is that none of the varieties of language is inherently better than any other. They're simply different. Okay? So they're simply different. Don't say that this variety is good and this variety is bad. Linguistically, they're different because we're not talking about the prestige, we're not talking about the power and some other factors. We're talking about the linguistic structure. So linguistically, nothing is, let's say, talking about better. Every language is same. So the study of regional dialects, this brief history of American Dialect Society, which was formed in 1889, and this is the person Hans Kurer, Linguistic Atlas of the United States and Canada, I think came up with, and then they collected lots of data, manual data collection those days, nowadays. So manual data collection, questionnaires, later on audio recording and conversational interviews were conducted. They did all that kind of things, and so this is the time queried on, dialectology work, 1939 also, and the word geography of the Eastern United States, 1949. I'm talking about USA, and in India also, not necessarily dialectology. If you have heard about India, you must have heard about Grierson, Grierson's Linguistic Survey of India, which started somewhere in 1889, 1888, and then ended in 1927, more than almost 40 years. It's a tremendous work by Grierson, okay? So, now really, if you look at this, so this volumes contain linguistic maps showing the geographical distribution of various linguistic forms. So isoglosses and dialect boundary are also marked. So what is this isogloss? And just I'll simply tell you that what is isogloss and what is dialect boundary. How do you make this? So isogloss represents the boundary between the areas with regard to the particular lexical item we are talking about. Let's say English, in one place in English it is called paper bag, and the paper bag, the same paper bag is called paper sack in another place. So depending on that, you can try to make a kind of isogloss. And in one variety, in one word, let's say the word lift and elevator. So lift is basically it's a British variety, and elevator is the American variety. So and even the languages, whichever the language we are talking about. Just 1 second. Let me drink some water. Okay, just hold on. Yes, sorry for the interruption. Okay, so even Rajbanshi, that language variety which is spoken in North Bengal, even in Bangladesh, and so I try to make kind of even the isogloss bon, bohim, bon, bohim, boim. So depending on the geographical region, also we may try to make kind of isogloss for that matter. So what is this isogloss? It is usually possible to draw a line across a map separating the two areas. So there is a map, and try to draw a line with a broken line. It's a broken line, and depending on one word, or depending on some lexical items. So when number of isoglosses come together in this way, a more solid line indicating a dialect boundary can be drawn. And you have lots of isoglosses, then you can say that there are lots of differences, and then in the map you can draw a solid line. So that is the dialect boundary. So try to understand that if there is isogloss, that only depending on few words or one or two words, you just simply try to make kind of isogloss, the broken line, and the dialect boundary is like there are many words depending on different areas of the grammar, in the phonetic areas, maybe the morphological cases, even the syntactic cases also come to picture. Okay, so so that's what it indicates, that the speech of the particular group is different in a number of ways from other groups around it. So number of ways, not only but one or two, there are different kind of. Okay, so now regional variety of Rajbanshi, and that's what the Rajbanshi, as I was telling about, the name of the language is Rajbanshi. It's not only Rajbanshi, there are different names, Kamtapuri, and there are many names are given, and there are lots of politics. I will not put you this politics, what is happening, but simply tell you that I had a project, this project for I think 3 or 4 years I tried to conduct, and this language is spoken in North Bengal of West Bengal, and somewhere in Assam, as well as in Bangladesh, as I told you, Rangpur in Bangladesh. And so depending on the regional variety, so within North Bengal, I did not go Bengal and Assam. Within this North Bengal, there are three different districts. I tried to collect data from those 3 different districts, and then let's say, and depending on many words, and this is the IPA transcription. So one variety is Kuch Bihar, and another is in Jalpaiguri, another is in somewhere in the Darjeeling. And depending on many words, I try to just transcribe those words, and so same thing. Let's see if you're interested, trying to do the regional variety. So even in the Zonka variety and any other minority variety, whether it is spoken in, let's say Zonka variety, Thimpu, Basa, Paro, Ha, Punakha, Dagana, Chukha, can also do that kind of like how, and then how many differences, how much differences is there. So you can draw a boundary also is there, or maybe isogloss for that matter. Okay, so this is simple kind of Rajbanshi. Some of the samples I'm simply showing you that yes, this is the word. So and Talking about Jonka, as I was telling you, depending on the western districts, I think there are 8 western districts, or maybe more than eight western districts. And Zonka is mainly spoken in the western districts, and not only western districts and southern and eastern districts is not necessarily the mother tongue, but as we all know that Zonka is a national language, so people of southern and eastern districts also they have to learn it because it's a national language, and and this variety I'm talking about, the 8 western districts, as I've simply mentioned, maybe you can find more. So at the same time, Zonka, that the variety as I'm talking about the Kalimpong, especially in Kalimpong, is also spoken. The Zonka is also spoken, and this variety will definitely be different from Zonka. Zonka is spoken in Bhutan because it is neighboring language. You have Lepcha, and as well as other Tibeto-Burman languages, even Nepali for that matter. So this will be different. So Lepcha, Nepali, and other minority languages in Bhutan is not only about Zunka, which is the only one language. You have also some minority languages. I think you all know Laka, Broka, Trokpa, Laya, Buntangs, Gala, Dakpa, Chali, and there are many others. You see, but Zunka is chosen as a national language. Now, talking about all these things, I think you are aware of this person, George Bandry, and George Bandry has done, extensible research, especially the languages of the Himalayan region, whether it's Bhutan and Nepal, even languages of the Northeast, India, So, an extensive work by George Bandry, Professor George Bandry. Okay, so whichever the things you are interested, you can do, or maybe work the language, whatever the variety you speak, you can also work on your variety. Okay, so now linguistic variations, as I was telling you, that the variations can have in a different level of the grammar, not only the phonological level or the phonetic level. So sound plays a manner of articulation in the phonological level. So phonological level in the syllable structure, phonological process. There are many other things we talked about. The morphological level, your teacher must have talked about different levels of the grammar, morphology, syntax. Even the syntax also, semantic level also. As I was talking about vocabulary choice, and just I think it's an example from Pigeon Rajbanshi. So one is called Paira, another is Kabutar or Koitur, So which one is, you can just, on the basis of that also, you can go ahead with an isogloss and dialect boundary. So other variations, and the variations depending on the culture, history, and script also. I was telling you in the initial. So there can be different kind of variations depending on that. You see. Now, moving on to the next topic, language and social variations, social varieties of language. And so, briefly, I covered this regional varieties of language. Now, I'm trying to cover the social varieties. And this is the part where we talk about social linguistics. Okay, so in social linguistics, and so what is this? Briefly, I'll talk about this. So, speakers in the same geographical area do not speak in the same manner. So it's not necessarily that I come from Kuch Bihar, or you come from Thimpu or Gasa. So all the speakers of Thimpu and Gasa, they speak in the same manner. No, not necessarily. There are also variations within the same geographical, regional, level. So certain uses of language are more likely to be used by some individuals in society and not by others. So people of different educational and economic status often speak in quite different ways. So people of different educational economic status, so different educational, as I told you, that depending on the education, economic status, what kind of economic status you have, so often speak in quite different ways. And now, and depending on that, a speech community is a group. Speech community is formed. A speech community is the group of people who share a set of norms and expectations regarding the use of language, and that's what the speech community depends on. And regarding the question, earlier, if you remember the speech community, so every speech community has certain kind of shared understanding. So Bengali speech community have certain shared understanding. Even Hindi, the English speech community as well. So there is a group of people who share a set of norms and expectations regarding the use of language. So everywhere there is a kind of So you will have to. So now this is the area social linguistics. It is the study of the relationship between language and society. It has definitely, when you talk about social linguistics, relationship between language and society, and it has strong connection. Social linguistics and a strong connection with anthropology. Why anthropology? Because anthropology through the study of language and culture. Because we also look at language and culture. With sociology, because there is a social group, prestige, social group institutions we talked about. So there is a strong connection with this, as well as psychology. We have also linked with psychology, sociolinguistics, social psychology with regard to how attitude and perceptions are expressed and how in-group and out-group behaviors are identified. So in-group behavior and out-group behavior. So it has very close link with psychology or social psychology for that matter. Okay, so the people who work in this area, they are aware of it because, and we always talk about language is always related to culture. So you cannot segregate language from culture. Okay, you cannot segregate language from culture. Uh, so now social varieties of language or social class. The social dialects is and depending on the social class, as I was telling you that social dialects is more concentrated on the speech of people, mainly in the urban, mainly in town or cities. Because in the urban areas, what happens, we can see lots of people. In the rural areas, what happens that you do not see that kind of mixed group of people. But in the urban areas, there are different people. So as a result, we may see different kind of social variation. So so social class mainly define the group of speakers. So you have upper class, let's say, middle class, working class. So this classification, depending on the again different place in India, you may have a different kind of classification. In Bhutan also, you may have a different kind of classification with this upper class, middle class, and working class. So you can so within that also you can have let's say upper and lower, subdivide the group upper middle class, lower middle class on economic basis also. So and social variable and linguistic variable. So one thing is that we have looked at that class is the social variable and pronunciation of word choice is linguistic variable. So social variable, definitely the class is the social variable. So and you can understand yourself that which class you belong to, whether you are in middle class, working class, and whichever the class. And so the class is the social variable. But talking about the pronunciation part, is a linguistic variable. So I end finished here. I have so especially working class speech in America. So many working class people instead of saying I haven't finished it yet, so they may say this. So now, talking about this education and occupation, as I told you that everybody speaks in a same in a different manner. Everybody has his own way of speaking, individual way of speaking, and what we call a personal dialect or idiolect. Okay? So my idiolect is definitely different from your idiolect. Okay, and but speakers sound like others with whom they share similar educational background or occupations. So, because if they have similar kind of educational backgrounds or occupation, this sounds similar. Okay, so and we had seen that mainly educated speakers tend to have more features in their spoken language which they derive from written language, and somehow the written language, we try to conform to the need of the written language somewhere, and so educated speakers or literate speakers have more features of written language, and so and this is where the famous study of William Labov post-vocalic Ra pronunciation. I'll just simply try to explain it to you. This post-vocalic Ra pronunciation. So pronunciation of Ra sound among salespeople in 3 New York City department stores. Ra is basically, this sound. If you talk about the American variety and British variety, there is these 2 different varieties. British varieties, what happens is that they try to drop the especially in the final position. So instead of saying car, they American people they say car. So R is silent or dropped. But American variety they will not drop. They will say car. So Ra is not dropped. So depending on that, who retains the Ra, who doesn't retain the Ra, especially in the last position, what we say that coda position, post vocalic position, what is happening there, pronunciation of Ra among salespeople.
नहीं मेरा नहीं बेटा
This person William Labo conducted this study in 1966, and it's a famous study. I'll just simply share you this study. William Labov study of Ra, and so what he did, William Labov, he visited 3 departmental stores, and one is basically upper class people they go, and another is the middle class people go, and another is the, let's say, the working class people they go, and he tried to see that how they use this Ra, so upper class is the expensive items where upper middle class people go, and then the cheaper items, and so he has visited this, and so the kind of questions he asked to the people who visited, and so he asked the question, where are the women's shoes? And he knows that women's shoes are kept in the 4th floor. So people say 4th floor, and you look at the word floor, Ra, it's ending Ra. So whether they say the word Ra or not, so you try to observe, you try to record all these things, okay? So post-vocalic Ra at the end of a word. Try to look at this, end of the word. So, and then he found that the higher the socioeconomic status of the store, the Ra sounds were basically produced. So more higher status, so Ra, they retained Ra. And lower socioeconomic status, they dropped Ra. Okay, so this is really interesting, and depending on the people, the way they pronounce certain word, you can also talk about their status, economic status, So lower the status, the fewer Ra sounds are produced. Lower status, fewer Ra. So 4th floor, so they will say 4th floor. Ra is dropped, and so this is really interesting, and this is William Labo studies. I'll just briefly talk about William Labo studies. Again, the prestige factor, what is happening in the prestige. At times what happens that when we are more careful, we try to retain the standard variety, and less careful, maybe our normal way of speaking. So what happened in this study, I'll just simply tell you. So similar kind of study, Peter Trudgill, he tried to conduct in 1974 in UK variety, and in the UK variety, what we had seen in the American variety, and in the UK variety, it was little different, not little, but completely different. So similar kind of study were conducted on reading British variety, 40 miles away from London. This is the place. So upper middle class people did not seem to pronounce the post-vocalic Ra. So basically they dropped it. And so that's what, that's marvelous, darling. So you look at this. Marvelous, Ra is dropped, and again here Ra is dropped. So it's mainly, middle class, upper middle class, it's dropping Ra. And on the other hand, they are retaining Ra in American variety. And and this is the comparison between William Labov study and Peter Trudgill study, and upper middle class, we look at this 32, they're retaining, and lower middle class, upper working class, lower working class, and then, so totally kind of opposite kind of things, scenario we could see, So this is pretty interesting if you look at it, opposite. So the prestige factor is definitely there, and I'll talk about the prestige factor. So social markers. Uh, so then we can say that Ra can be a social markers. The linguistic variable Ra can be the virtually opposite in terms of social status in two different places in America as well as in London. So Ra is functioning as this, and Ra is functioning in a totally different way. If you look at this, you see. So whether you realize it or not, the feature frequently occur in your speech, and it actually happens in your speech. So as I was telling you that talking about pronunciation of sa and sha. So these Bahari speakers, since they have acquired it, at times it comes naturally. For Bengali speakers also, the palatal sha, most of the time they speak the palatal sha. So so whether you realize it or not, the feature frequently occur in your speech or mark you as a member of a particular social group, and it happens. And maybe that's what many Tibeto-Burman speakers, when they speak English, their way of speaking is different. Americans' way of speaking is different, and so whether you realize it or not, it is there. So another feature of pronunciation of ing, with ing form, there is also research conducted. This ing, let's say I am going. In one variety, mainly I am going. The velar, uvular, na is pronounced, and another is the alveolar one is pronounced. So I am going, and another is going. So, and especially the lower social working class speech will have the alveolar one mainly. That's another study conducted. So, and again, hard dropping, especially in English, we had also seen that I am so hungry. Instead of I am so hungry, people may say I am so hungry that I could eat a horse. Instead of saying horse, many people that drop ha, and it was mainly very, especially in British English. Charles Dickens, this David Copperfield, you must have read about David Copperfield, and this is the line from David Copperfield. So I am well aware that I am the humblest person going, say to Ria, if modestly, my mother is like a very humble person. So instead of humble, so how is being dropped, and it's a kind of, especially David Copperfield, who have read it, kind of less education, lower class speech, or dropping phenomena we had also noticed. So, and this is really interesting. So I try to project you the kind of different, depending on the variety, the kind of study conducted by sociolinguist, famous sociolinguist. One is William Labov, another is Peter Tradgill. And what happens is that there is a speech style, and not necessarily so. We also change our style or shift our style, from one variety to another variety. At times we are careful, at times we are not careful. So it happens. It depends on, there are many other factors which are associated with it. Okay, so speech style is a social feature of language use, so formal use, a careful style. So at times we pay more careful attention on to how we are speaking, especially in the academic discourse. We try to be more careful, and many people, they are very very careful when they speak. So the careful attention, and informalities and casual style, when you pay less attention. When you are talking to your friends, let's say you are very casual, just simply talking. Don't think about, it comes to naturally. So, so the careful style, and there is casual style, and so what is happening? A change from one to another style by an individual is called style shifting. So what is style shifting? So from one style to another style, you are just shifting. So we do it, and I was talking about this William Labov study, and I'll tell you that really interesting that William Labov, what he did to observe this, whether people are speaking with the careful style or casual style. So when people answer this, where is the women's shoes? People said foot floor, and intentionally he said, as if like he did not listen, heard, here, and said, "Excuse me," and people said that um, fourth floor, fourth floor. So what happened in that case? The many people, when when they become careful, they more, let's say, especially in the American variety, they dropped it. Uh, they dropped, so this is what really interesting. So they retain it in American variety, because earlier they were dropping, especially the working class people, and they were retaining. And so this is really interesting. So the answer fourth floor is a careful style, and the frequency of post vocabulary increased in all groups. So when they are speaking in the careful style, so the post vocabulary increased in all groups. So carefully we try to speak the standard language. Okay, so this is where style shifting is also taking place, and so it is confirmed that the middle class speakers are much more likely to shift their style, and especially the middle class speaker, they try to shift their style, and the upper middle class when they are using careful style. So especially the middle class, because they have to conform to the need of the so to say the upper class. We try to show up also that, yeah, I speak English this manner or that manner. I have this kind of accent and that kind of accent also. So some people are more careful. That's what I was telling you. The lower middle class speakers will increase the post vocalic and higher than among the upper middle class speakers. So, and again the same thing. They also increase the post vocalic because the prestige factor is there. Because that's the standard one. Okay. So this is really interesting to look at, and the prestige factor, as I told you, that style shifting and the prestige form of language use, and perceived as higher social status, or generally recognized as more positively valued in the larger community. So, it's because we try to, as I told you, to conform to the higher social status, and there's a more positive value in the larger community. So that's the overt prestige, and there are different reasons as well. You can understand that there's lots of opportunity in the standard language. So you always try to speak like the other people, especially the upper class people, but it's not necessarily so. In many cases, we had seen that there is overt prestige as well. So certain groups of people, they do not want to speak, the way the standard users they speak. So certain groups do not exhibit style shifting to the extent as other groups. They may value group solidarity. Okay, they may value the features that mark them as a group. Okay, we do not want to speak like this way. Our variety is this, so it's okay. We'll speak. This is the way. So many Afro-American, they don't want to change their style of speaking. So if they are saying I'm going, instead of saying going, they say I'm going. It's fine. It is our identity marker. It's fine. We'll go ahead with that. So there are many kind of whether you talk about in the phonetic level, in the morphological level, in the syntactic level also, we had seen that people speak in their own way. So there is a overt prestige also. So there is and one more thing, and I think this is the last slide, and so we try to accommodate our speech, as I told you that. So, and we try to modify our speech. So our ability to modify our speech style toward or away from perceived style of the persons we are talking to. So at times, and I think we all do it. If you remember, let's say you are in your college or in your university, and if you are from rural place or maybe whichever the place you are come from, and you talk to a certain person, maybe your grandmother or grandfather, she speaks in a different manner or different style. You try to speak in our own in that language, and we all do. And I remember, let's see, if I go to my place, back to my, so I speak my own mother tongue, which is Rajbanshi, and I speak, the pure the Rajbanshi variety, and people also say that, oh, you speak the same language, and people. So I carefully, and there are many places I speak Bangla. There are many places I can also speak, let's say, to some extent Assamese. That's not a problem. And even for that matter, so even if you talk about Hindi or English, I'm talking to you in English. Even in Hindi, at least some varieties of Hindi I can also select, let's say, because I have conducted field work in different places. So there is the Bhojpuri variety, or it's the Kanpuri variety, or the UP variety, different variety I'm talking about. We can switch on to that variety also. So we kind of modify our speech style, and we all do it. We all do it. So there is a speech accommodation, adoption of speech style, reduce social distance or increase social distance. So it could be either this way or that way. So adoption of a speech style reduce social distance, because let's say if you speak the same Zonka variety, and other person is also speak the same Zonka variety, you feel that, oh, he from my place, from my region, he speak the same variety. So reduce social distance or increase social distance. Depends on. At times it depends on. So there are different factors associated with that. Either it can reduce the social distance or increase the social distance, and there can be depending on the distance divergence also. And this is where one of the example from Afro-American kid, a teenager, so talking to teacher, so I cannot do it, sir. Teacher, oh, come on, if you can do it, if I can do it, you can too. And teenager, he says, look, I can it. And so this is the way he speaks basically. So emphasizing that I cannot do it, and this is my way of talking also. I can't do it. So we all do it. So there is a divergence. There is a distance, or maybe at times there is a kind of uh, reduce the social distance. Okay, so I think that's all for today. We have briefly talked about the social varieties of language as well as the regional varieties of language, and some of the the kind of theoretical research we talked about today. Even I tried to give examples from my own experiment, the kind of field work I conducted in Rajbanshi, as I told you. So that's all. There are many books. I could not list all the books, but only 2 or 3 books. That's mainly introduction to linguistics books, and there are many social linguistics books you can read. Joshua Fishman is there. Even if you talk about Miriam Meyerhoff, and there are many social linguistics books as well. Talking about William Labo, Peter Trudgill, and there are many others books. So if you are interested, if you need any books, so I can simply email it to you. Okay. So that's all. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for your patience. Okay. And thank you. Padrin Chela, Namaste, Namaskar, Dhanabad. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you so much, sir.
Hello, Chitra ma'am. How are you? I think your mic is you need to unmute yourself, ma'am.
Hello, Professor. It's
Hello, ma'am.
a pleasure listening to you. And you have expressed your thanks in all the languages. Thank you. I can do it in Tamil. Nandri.
Oh, great. Okay, you speak Tamil. You speak Tamil.
Yes.
Great. Oh. So we have Bengali, Tamil, South Indian, Dravidian variety, and I can see Dechen also, again Tibeto-Burman variety. It's really interesting. In India itself, we have lots of diversity. You see, depending on the region as well as the social class.
Yes.
So even
that
the variety
is much suitable for linguistic experiment and the field research that you are carrying out. There is no end to it.
That's true, ma'am. Let's say talk about another teacher, Sharmistha, and Sharmistha, I think she comes from Tripura, and the Tripura variety is a totally different variety, the standard variety.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So Bengali, in Kolkata Bengali, they speak, as it like When they are speaking, they are more like singing a song. Like.
Even at home, sir, my mom and dad, they speak different dialects.
So they speak different dialects. So they speak the variety. Bangla variety is spoken in Bangladesh, which is different.
Yeah, my dad speaks that, and my mom speaks in the Sylheti variety.
Sylheti variety, and Sylheti is also different. But we also are Bengali, But there are
yeah. And today's lecture, especially, it will be very useful, I guess, for my students, because some of them, I told them, if they're interested, they can carry out their research for their master's thesis, master's dissertation on social linguistics. So I'm really hopeful that they will really go through the lecture again, so that it can be useful for them.
Yeah, I was also thinking along those lines. When Professor shared his research experience, I felt that will motivate our students to conduct research. Yeah. The R and the middle class, and how the class conscious society drops it or retains it. That's an interesting study which aligns itself with the socio-culture and language. We are also expecting the same. Sarmista, any questions from students?
Guys, do you have any questions? Any confusion, queries, anything?
Yeah, one of you can please speak from the student side.
Yeah.
Madam, sir.
Yes.
Sir, it's not regard to this lesson, to this topic, but I just have a clarification on a small doubt on international English and then English as a globalization. Can we take these two as same, sir?
So, international English as a global language.
Yes. Does it mean same, sir? Or I think it has a difference, no, sir?
International English as a global language. See, if you talk about English as a global language, definitely we're trying to communicate globally from one nation to another nation, you see. And international language, for that matter, if you're saying that this is the international language, there are many nations that are not going to accept English as an international language. I can tell you.
Okay, sir.
China is not going to accept.
Okay.
China is not going to accept. Even Germany is not going to accept. France is not going to accept. We try to understand this. And there are many nations, even in the developed countries also. And I can tell you that this is talking about Chinese and Chinese monopoly, even the software, let's say. Talking about even the computer systems. So they have developed their own script, own kind of coding systems and everything in Mandarin. So talking about international language, if you say, and it is very difficult to have international language. And even if you talk about UNESCO, whoever the members of UNESCO, for your understanding, that it is not only English. UNESCO members, they can communicate with other languages at the same time. It's a pretty complex, different kind of scenario altogether. And, try to understand the whole thing. It is not only about English, it is especially the whole, the world, if you look at it. So somewhere, even the English, which was earlier the British variety of English, which dominated in the whole world. So try to understand this. And India and other countries, because we tried to learn the British variety. And now the world politics, it is America, it is dominating now. And people are gradually and slowly moving to the American variety of English. Don't you think so?
Yes, sir.
So you never know the American variety because of downfall of America. You never know. America and no country for that matter can rule. Earlier it was Great Britain, now it is USA, maybe one day maybe it is Bhutan or India. No, but No, don't know which country will rule. So that's what, depending on that. So always the power status is always there. So talking about the international language, in my understanding, to have one international language and to impose that international language to other nations, many nations will not buy it. And I can tell you, let's say, talk about Japan for that matter. Talk about Korea for that matter. Earlier, Korea, what happened? Japanese script was introduced to Korea, but after that, Japanese, especially Japan, when Korea got their freedom, then they have developed their own script. They have developed their own script. Talking about what is the script? Sejul King says, you know. So now, really interesting to know that. So once the king and the queen or whatever the domination, the power is gone, so people will try to come back to their own culture and their own power. So talking about this Dzongkha, let's say, even if your Dzongkha language, when it was declared as national language, you tell me. Earlier it was not the national language of Bhutan. It was something else. Don't you think so?
Yes.
I think earlier, sir, it was Hindi used in Bhutan.
No, there is another language.
Dialects were used.
Cheki.
Yeah,
It's a classical language.
yeah, that's what. It was mainly Buddhist texts were written in that language,
Yes.
not Hindi. Okay, so
Tibetan derivative.
yeah. So and that's also language of China. Mainly Sino-Tibetan, Proto-Sino-Tibetan group language. So that's what I'm telling you. So to have an international language, and other things that people do not want to forget their own culture on their own history also. Bengalis, for any sect, they'll try to retain their own Bangla culture. And the same way, German will try to do, Chinese will try to do, and that's the whole thing is going on in the world. So to impose an international language with any nation or any community is very difficult. And you see that what is happening in Bengal also, since you are very close to Bengal, what is happening in Bengal, when people, Bengali, Mamata Banerjee imposed Bengali to Nepali community. And as a result, there's a huge uproar in Darjeeling and other places. Because Nepali is a totally different variety. Okay. So, madam, so that's what international language and global language, yes, in my understanding, we should have a global language for global communication. That is fine. And it is there. Let's say for if you travel from one place to another place, let's say air hostess, for international communication at times, which we should have. And English is accepted, especially air hostess or the pilot, they speak the same English. They do not speak in a different language. For something, because the pilot, if they speak in German, the other, if they say Mayday, Mayday, Mayday is that the plane is going to crash, So everybody understands, whether you speak Arabic, whether you speak Bangla or something. So for international communication, we should have some. So, and for your information, many people they tried. So there is a language they try to develop, Esperanto. You can just simply try it, Esperanto. 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 They try to develop that language to have that international communication, and they took words from English, from this language and that language, but it was never a successful process. Why is it so? Esperanto cannot be a successful language. The reason is as simple as that. Language comes naturally. We cannot devise a language artificially. Can you see that? Whichever the language, it comes naturally. So there cannot be an artificial language. Yeah, artificial language, you can have computer language or something, artificial language, coding language. But to have an effective communication, the language has to come, automatically, spontaneously from in the community. So Esperanto was not successful. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Did I answer your queries, or it was too much?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. It made me clear.
Thank you. So, anything else? So, nice to meet you all. And I think next time, if time permits, even I'm not far away from Bhutan because I keep on coming to Darjeeling. And maybe time permits, maybe I can also come to your place one day by the grace of the Almighty. So, anything else, Armista and Chitra ma'am?
That's all, sir. If there any more questions, Jigme, do you have any?